Let's bring in MS Now reporter Julia Jester, along with Aaron David Miller, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace Senior Fellow, and former CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos. He's an MS Now national security analyst. Julia, Hegseth says this 60-day countdown's on pause. Other administration officials have said the war is terminated because of the ceasefire in effect. What does the law say?
Yes, I was inside the hearing yesterday when he said that, and you could sense the skepticism in the room that just because a ceasefire is underway means that the law does not apply. But there is some precedent of how previous administrations have handled it. If you look at the Clinton administration in 1993 with Somalia, they basically argued at the time, then the Assistant Secretary of State said that it's meant for sustained hostilities, and it does not apply to what she described as intermittent military engagements. And so the argument is that, for example, you look at the Battle of Mogadishu, where Americans were killed, and if you're familiar with Black Hawk Down, the clock resumed under that battle, but then stopped immediately after. And you've seen this in other engagements, including President Obama with actions taken in Libya. But the question is that if you can just stop and start that clock, does it essentially make it irrelevant, right? Any administration could argue that hostilities stop and start. You have covert operations, you have, sensitive military events happening intermittently, right? And so I guess the question now is, what does that mean for the armada that Trump himself described heading to the Middle East? What does it mean for the force posture of the tens of thousands of American troops in the region? If it's really this hostilities ending, then we should see a withdrawal of those forces, right? And so it really is quite a novel legal theory that the Trump administration will have to defend. And Hegseth kind of just blurted that out in the hearing without really kind of justifying it in that perspective.
Mark, is the U.S. still at war?
Well, certainly you have about 50,000 U.S. forces who are deployed. And so I think that the men and women of the U.S. military do believe that. You have the U.S. military leadership briefing the President of the United States yesterday, Admiral Cooper, the CENTCOM chief, and Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, on potential military options if, for example, diplomacy doesn't succeed. So I think there's a chance that this kind of kicks off again. And look at the end of the day, many administrations, including Democratic ones, didn't really adhere to the War Powers Act, the War Power Resolution. But it's a framework for consultations. And I think ultimately it's this notion that the White House does not make a case to Congress or the American public for this war. And when you look at opinion polls of 60 to 70% of Americans who are opposed to this, some of the White House arguments that the Democrats are the naysayers, well, the American people are as well, and they really should have done a better job on this. And dialogue with Congress could have helped, and it will do so in the future. They need more of that.
Yeah, the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. The U.S. is still working on this blockade there and enforcing it. Trump spoke about the state of the war yesterday in the Oval Office. Let's listen.
Nobody knows what the talks are except myself and a couple of other people. They want to make a deal badly. We have a problem because nobody knows for sure who the leaders are. It's a little bit of a problem.
Aaron, you just wrote a piece entitled "President Trump Might Come to Regret the Iran War." How do you see things right now?
I think we're nowhere, Anna. I think next week we enter the third month of the war. The options are all very unattractive. Yes, the president can continue to blockade, and if he's prepared to keep it on for 4 or 5 months, he could probably break the Iranian economy. 90% of Iranian imports are seaborne. But is he prepared to keep the blockade on and watch oil prices go up in excess of $150, $200 a barrel? Then there's escalation. And the chiefs, I'm sure, have presented the president an array of options. But I think this is wash, rinse, and repeat. No amount of intensity of military strikes, it seems to me, is going to force this regime to capitulate or, frankly, to comply with better positions at the negotiating table. Look, in my view, there is a pathway out of this. The Iranians opened the straits, not according to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of what to open, but they opened them to pre-war traffic flow. The administration pulls the blockade, and they set a 30 to 45 day period where you could arguably, theoretically on paper, hopefully address the broader issues of this conflict to see whether or not you actually can strike a deal. And negotiations on it can't be done on the back of a cocktail napkin. It can't be done on a cell phone. It can't be done in 21 hours with the Vice President, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner. These are going to be long and arduous negotiations. I'm skeptical, frankly, about when any deal is possible. One last point. The only clock that counts, frankly, and it is sad about war powers, no American president, Democrat or Republican, has ever allowed war powers to constrain their action. The only clocks that count, frankly, is whether or not the Iranian clock is ticking faster or slower than the pain threshold clock of the Trump administration. And we'll see where we are 3, 4, 5 weeks from now to see who can absorb more pain.
And as we wait to see Trump's next moves on Iran, there's another ceasefire on thin ice right now. Aaron, what do you see as the most realistic outcome of talks between Israel and Lebanon?
I think you're going to continue in the undercover, a so-called ceasefire, to see a kind of limited de-escalation. Maybe the Israelis won't conduct comprehensive strikes against Hezbollah positions in the southern suburbs of Beirut or in densely populated civilian areas. But there really is no ceasefire, and the Israelis have a plan. Their experience in Lebanon has been an unhappy one. It's not going to work. They can't destroy Hezbollah. The Lebanese government is unable, unwilling to truly act against Hezbollah. So I think, sadly, like Hamas in Gaza, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like Iran, in an asymmetrical conflict, I don't care how much military power the U.S. has, it cannot impose its will, or at least history suggests it cannot. So we drift on it, and I think the real losers here are civilians in Lebanon, civilians in Iran, the international global economy, the millions of people who have been plunged into poverty as a consequence of inflationary cycles and inflated oil prices. That's what happens in a war of choice. Brutal, authoritarian, repressive regime in Iran, no doubt. The question is how to deal with it. And this is, in my judgment, this is not the way.
And right now, President Trump appears to be fighting not only America's adversaries, but also U.S. allies. He's talked about drawing down troops in Germany. And here's what he said yesterday when asked if Spain and Italy could see American troops pulled as well. Let's listen.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I probably will. Why should I? Look, why shouldn't I? Italy has not been of any help to us. And Spain has been horrible, absolutely horrible.
Mark, what would a Europe with fewer American troops look like? And is this in America's best national security interests?
Well, let's start with the second part of that, Anna. Look, national security is a team sport, and we need allies. And the fact is, and President Trump knows this, the Germans actually have been helpful. There's logistical hubs there that have been critical in the Iran fight. But I also think that, European, friends and allies, and I've talked to them all the time, are coming to an understanding that they're going to have to go at it alone. And so you might see actually a reduced U.S. presence. And that's not certainly in the U.S. interest. But I think the Europeans are kind of coming to that conclusion that the Trump and the Trump administration can't be trusted. And it doesn't matter if you have the NATO, Secretary General coming and kind of groveling at the president, and things are kind of made nice, for 5 minutes or so. The bottom line is that Trump is so transactional, he'll turn on Europeans. And in a second, and Anna, there's a key point on this. These countries in Europe are democracies, and the people, if you take a look at the opinion polls, the European public detests Trump. They're very distrustful of the United States. So a lot of what the European leaders are kind of coming forward in their opposition to the war in Iran is based on the public sentiment. That actually is what democracies are all about.